The story begins with Edward, who works at a company named Bromley Marks. Bypassing the company's tight security, Edward reaches a room where thousands of humans were captured and kept imprisoned, and their blood was being harvested. In fact, due to a dangerous virus, 95% of the world's population has turned into vampires. Now, they need human blood to stay alive. If they don't drink human blood, they transform into extremely dangerous creatures called subsiders. This is exactly why this company runs a business selling human blood to vampires. On the other hand, a girl was writing her final letter in her diary. After this, she steps out of her house and begins waiting for the sun to rise. In reality, that girl was also a vampire who had become completely fed up with this life of immortality and bloodlust. The moment the first ray of the sun hit her, her entire body was engulfed in flames and she burned to ashes. This is the reason why the entire world lies deserted in the daylight, and as soon as night falls, these vampires live their normal lives just like humans. Now only 5% of humans are left in the world. That is why researchers are busy trying to create synthetic blood to keep the vampires alive and to fulfill the shortage of human blood. After this, a high-level meeting takes place in the company, in which the company's boss Charles Bromley, the commissioner, and some big officers were present. The commissioner shows everyone the result of an experiment conducted on a prisoner sentenced to death. This test was performed on that prisoner to see what happens to a vampire if they do not get blood. The pictures were terrifying. First, his ears began to grow long, and in no time, he transformed into a vicious subsider who had absolutely no power left to think or understand. The commissioner warned that these subsiders are now becoming a massive trouble on the streets. If another alternative for blood is not found soon, then due to hunger, all the remaining vampires will also turn into animals just like this. Just then, interrupting the conversation, Bromley takes Edward to his office for a private meeting. There, he offers Edward coffee with human blood, which Edward completely refuses to drink. Bromley shares his story with him, telling him that he had cancer, but after becoming a vampire, his illness was cured. However, his daughter refused to become a vampire and ran away from home. Bromley knew very well that Edward feels pity for humans. That is why he told Edward that if they want to save the human race, they must create synthetic blood as soon as possible. After this, Edward reaches his lab and talks to his partner Christopher. Christopher gives him good news that their synthetic blood is working perfectly fine on a monkey. This meant that the time had now come to test it on a vampire. The testing begins in the lab, and Bromley, along with his officers, was watching everything through the window. Edward slowly injects that synthetic blood into the body of a vampire soldier. In the beginning, everything seemed fine, but as soon as the full dose went inside the body, that soldier began to writhe in terrible pain. Horrific blisters broke out all over his body. To save him, researchers administer another injection, which did stop his writhing. But the very next second, that soldier's body exploded like a bomb. This meant the experiment had failed miserably. That same night, Edward leaves for his house by car. On the car's radio, news was playing that due to a severe shortage of blood, riots were breaking out everywhere. Just then, while scratching his ear, Edward feels something strange. He checks in the mirror and is completely shocked. His ears had now slowly started to grow long, meaning he was also on the verge of becoming a subsider. Distracted by this tension, he loses focus, and his car narrowly avoids a collision with an oncoming vehicle. However, that other car loses control and crashes into a fence. Edward gets out of his car to help when suddenly an arrow comes and hits him straight in his hand. In reality, there were no vampires in that other car, but rather some remaining humans, and their leader, Audrey, was holding a crossbow in her hands. Just then, the sound of police sirens is heard from a distance. Edward tells them that he only wants to help and asks those humans to hide inside his car. Edward immediately activates his car's daytime protection mode, causing all the car's windows to turn completely black so no one can see inside. As soon as the police arrive there, Edward pulls the arrow out of his hand and lies to the police that the humans ran in the other direction. Believing his words, the police leave from there. Meanwhile, inside the car, Audrey finds Edward's ID card, through which she learns that Edward is a hematologist and that today is also his birthday. The moment the police leave, all those humans come out of the car, and Audrey wishes Edward a happy birthday before vanishing from there with her companions. A little later, Edward arrives at his house, where a warning was being blasted over loudspeakers for everyone that the sun is about to rise, so everyone should head inside their homes. After reaching home, Edward eats his food and begins taking care of his plants. Just then, his brother Frankie suddenly comes to visit him. Frankie had joined the army, so the two were meeting after several months. Frankie questions him about why he didn't throw a party for his birthday. At this, Edward replies irritably that he has already turned 35 years old 10 times now, because after becoming a vampire, aging stops. But Frankie doesn't care about any of this. He had brought along an expensive bottle of human blood to celebrate. Frankie pours the blood into 2 glasses, but when Edward refuses to drink the human blood, Frankie loses his temper. He says, "You yourself won't touch human blood, yet you work for the exact same company that captures humans and drains their blood." At this, Edward reasons with him, explaining that he only works there to find a synthetic alternative to human blood, so that human lives can be saved. At the same time, Edward also dislikes his brother, because Frankie stays in the army and hunts down innocent humans. In the middle of this argument, an enraged Edward picks up the blood bottle and begins pouring it down the sink. Frankie stops him and, in a fit of rage, throws the bottle straight against the wall, smashing it and splattering blood all over the wall. After this, Frankie turns to leave from there in anger, but just then, a vicious subsider appears right in front of him. That terrifying creature storms straight into the kitchen and begins licking the blood splattered on the walls. Frankie immediately tries to grab a knife, which triggers the subsider, and it lifts Frankie up and hurls him against the wall. Frankie crashes onto a glass table and falls unconscious. Now, that monster moves toward Edward. Edward tries to keep it away from himself using a stool and starts calling out to his brother. Just then, Frankie regains consciousness, picks up the knife, and both brothers team up to attack the subsider. The creature agilely leaps and clings to the ceiling, but the moment Frankie gets a chance, he lands multiple blows on it and finally severs its head from its body. Within moments, the police arrive there, and the investigation begins. The next morning, Edward's sleep is broken by the sound of a security alarm. He goes to check, and the moment he turns on the light, Audrey was standing right there, aiming her crossbow at him. She tells Edward that they are looking for vampires who can be trusted. They needed Edward's help to find an alternative cure for this disease rather than just a blood substitute. Audrey hands him a piece of paper on which a map was drawn. Just then, Edward's attention is distracted by a sound, and he turns back. Taking advantage of this, Audrey quietly vanishes from there. When Edward checks on the sound, it turns out to be Frankie, who starts questioning Edward about that woman. Edward brushes it off, saying it was nothing. The next night, the news reports that investors are now pulling their hands out of Bromley's company because the supply of humans is constantly decreasing. Meanwhile, Edward sits in his lab, staring intently at the map. The next morning, Edward does not return home. Activating his car's light protection, he follows the map and reaches a deserted area far outside the city. Audrey was already waiting for him there. Edward parks his car under the shade of a tree and gets out wearing his hat and sunglasses. Very carefully avoiding the sunlight, he approaches an old man named Lionel. The shocking thing was that Lionel used to be a vampire before, but now he had become completely human again. Edward wanted to know exactly how this miracle happened, but just then, Audrey steps between them, held at gunpoint by Edward's brother, Frankie. Edward tries to stop his brother, but Frankie doesn't listen to a single word, and right then, the army backup arrives at the scene. Seizing the opportunity, Audrey violently shoves Frankie into the direct sunlight. Immediately, the soldiers open fire indiscriminately, destroying Lionel's vehicle. Now, they had only one way left to escape, Edward's car. While pursuing them, the soldiers rain bullets on the car, which pierces holes through the car's dark protection windows, allowing sunlight to stream inside. At first, Audrey tries to cover those holes with her hands, but because there were too many holes, the car's camera gets broken, and Edward loses all visibility of the road ahead. Now, Lionel takes over the steering wheel so he can look outside through one of the holes while keeping Edward safe from the sunlight. As soon as they reach an old and broken bridge, Lionel speeds up the car and crosses the bridge. However, the military truck chasing them is too heavy. It breaks through the bridge, plummets straight down, and explodes in a massive blast. The remaining soldiers are left far behind. As night falls, they all stop by a riverbank, where Lionel shares his story with Edward. He explains that he used to work on daylight modifications for cars. One day he was driving, but because he hadn't received any blood, his health was failing. Due to this, his car crashed into the river railing, and he was thrown out of the vehicle. Just before falling into the river, the sunlight caused his body to catch fire. But the moment he emerged from the water, he had become completely human again. Now, Lionel and Audrey want Edward to recreate these exact conditions in a lab environment, so vampires can be safely turned back into humans. On the other hand, back at the company, Bromley was looking at pictures of his daughter when Frankie arrives. Bromley praises him for providing all the information just in time. He promises Frankie that if Edward returns immediately, no legal action will be taken against him. Frankie also agrees to follow Bromley's every command. Meanwhile, Edward and the rest of the humans were heading toward their safe house inside the car. On the way, Edward's eyes repeatedly fixate on Audrey's neck. When Audrey notices Edward's lengthening ears and his thirsty gaze, she cuts her own hand, drains a little blood into a cup, and gives it to Edward to drink. At first, Edward refuses, but he gives in to his uncontrollable thirst and finally drinks the blood. A few hours later, they all arrive at an old vineyard, where Edward meets Jarvis and the rest of the humans. Jarvis is the leader of a team that rescues innocent humans trapped in various places and brings them to safe houses. Upon going inside, Edward meets a senator, who himself was a vampire politician, but he was in support of human rights and finding a cure for this disease. Meanwhile, at a subway station in the city, the situation was deteriorating. At a coffee stand, a vampire was complaining that there was too little blood in his coffee. The employee explained that due to the blood shortage, he was only allowed to mix 5% blood, but that man did not agree. He forcefully snatched a bag of blood and tore it open, splattering blood all over everyone standing there. The moment they saw the blood, the vampires present there went crazy. They started a riot and attacked the stand to steal more blood. Finally, the police arrived and managed to stop them by giving them electric shocks. The next morning, Edward draws some blood from Lionel's body for research and asks him, "The day you turned back into a human, how did you feel?" Edward had begun to feel that the way to destroy this virus lies within the body itself, meaning by controlling the burn caused by sunlight within a precise limit. A few hours later, when Edward comes out to take a break from the lab, most of the humans run away from him in fear upon seeing him as a vampire. Just then, Audrey comes over to him and says that even though these people are afraid of you, they are sure that you will definitely help them. In the middle of their conversation, Edward tells Audrey that he never wanted to become a vampire, but his own brother Frankie had betrayed him and forcefully turned him into a vampire. Just then, Edward's eyes fall on the large, airtight winemaking tanks kept there. Audrey explains that these tanks are fitted with air-extracting pumps, with the help of which any fire can be put out instantly. Edward had found his way. He decides that he will use these exact tanks for his rehumanization experiment, and both of them get to work together to make the necessary modifications to it. Late at night, Jarvis's group was leading a convoy of rescued humans toward the vineyard. Inside this group, Bromley's daughter, Allison, was also included. Suddenly, a gunshot punctures the tire of their vehicle, forcing them to stop. They step out with their weapons, but the army had surrounded them from all sides. Gunfire is exchanged from both sides for a while, after which all the humans are knocked unconscious. Just before losing consciousness, Allison somehow manages to communicate with the vineyard, but the moment Frankie snatches the walkie-talkie from her hand, the army tracks that call, and they discover the location of the vineyard. Meanwhile, at the vineyard, all the humans were packing their bags and getting into the vehicles so they could head to the safe house with the senator. However, Edward decided to stay behind because he knew that he would never get another chance at this experiment to turn himself human again. Therefore, Lionel and Audrey also stay back right there to help him. On the other hand, inside Bromley's office, Allison opens her eyes. The moment her father arrives there, she picks up a knife in anger and begins begging for her friends' lives. Bromley says that he is happy to see her, but while hugging her, he softly whispers that he cannot do anything for her friends. Allison pushes him away and runs toward the door, but just then, a soldier hits her and knocks her unconscious. Only then does Bromley realize that his daughter has stabbed him. The next morning at the vineyard, all the preparations to begin the experiment were complete. Audrey was keeping an eye on the monitor, and Lionel was standing with Edward near that airtight tank. A heart monitor was attached to Edward's chest, and he had covered himself with a wet blanket. The process was quite straightforward. They would make a cut in the tank, allowing the sunlight to burn Edward, and then they would immediately run the air-extracting machine to put out the fire. The first two attempts failed, but on the third try, they allowed Edward to burn for a little bit longer, and this time, the miracle happened. Edward had become a human once again, but right then, the army arrives there, though the three of them managed to avoid getting captured by hiding inside a giant wine drum. Back at the company, Frankie comes to meet his boss, Bromley. Bromley was getting his wound treated, and he assigns Frankie a horrific task. Frankie steps out of the room and goes straight into Allison's cell. Allison still did not want to become a vampire, but Frankie doesn't listen to a single word and forcefully bites her. Meanwhile, after the danger passes at the vineyard, the three of them come out of their hiding spot. The moment Edward steps out into the open, he is shocked to see that the sunlight was directly touching his skin, but he wasn't burning. In the meantime, Lionel brings out one of his old cars. At the company, Bromley sees that all his machines are now empty. He goes to check on his daughter, who was refusing to drink human blood. The moment Bromley steps inside the cell, he gets a profound shock. Due to hunger, Allison was biting herself, because of which she had started transforming into a subsider. She attacks her father and holds him responsible for all of this, after which the guards take her away from there. After this, Edward, Audrey, and Lionel arrive at the senator's cabin, but there they find all the humans dead. Seeing this, Audrey begins to lose her hope, but Edward comforts her and says, "I know someone who can still help us." On the other hand, inside the lab, Christopher achieves a massive breakthrough in his research. Meanwhile, out on the streets, the army was publicly bringing captured subsiders out into the sunlight and burning them to death. Allison was also present in that crowd, and seeing her writhe and suffer before dying right in front of his eyes, Frankie begins to feel deep remorse for what he had done. That same night, When Christopher returns to his house, Edward, Lionel, and Audrey were already waiting for him there. Edward tells him that he has a definitive cure to turn back into a human, which is far better than any synthetic blood. To prove this, he asks for Christopher's help. Just then, the phone rings suddenly, and Christopher goes into the other room to talk. When he doesn't return for a long time, they grow suspicious. Audrey goes inside to check on him, while Edward and Lionel check Christopher's computer. They discover that Christopher had intentionally left his phone on a call so that the company people could listen to their conversation and track their location. Just then, the army suddenly storms in and grabs Audrey, knocking her unconscious. However, Edward and Lionel somehow manage to escape through the tunnels. They hide inside an old abandoned garage where a subsider attacks them. At that exact moment, Frankie arrives there and shoots the monster. When Frankie's eyes fall on Edward, he is shocked to see that his brother has become human again. Becoming emotional, Frankie confesses that he had turned Edward into a vampire only because he didn't want to lose him. He admits his mistake and offers to help them. But as Lionel comes close to him, Frankie cannot control his hunger upon catching the scent of a human's blood. He lunges at Lionel and bites him. Edward immediately pulls Frankie away, shoving him away from Lionel. He was just about to shoot his brother, but right then, his eyes fall on something that makes him freeze. A little later, Edward himself walks straight into the company's building. Because he is a human, the security alarms start blaring everywhere. The guards tackle him and take him directly to Bromley's office, where Bromley was tied to a chair, drinking Audrey's blood. Edward lies to Bromley, saying that he regrets his mistakes and wants to become a vampire again. Hearing this, Audrey feels that Edward has betrayed her. Arrogantly, Bromley states that they have now found a synthetic blood alternative, so they no longer need Edward. He calls Edward a coward, to which Edward fires back, saying that Bromley himself is a coward who couldn't even stop his own daughter from turning into a vampire. Flying into a rage, Bromley bites straight into Edward's neck, but Edward wasn't panicked at all, because this was his actual master plan. As soon as Bromley drinks Edward's blood, he slowly begins to turn back into a human. Edward explains that drinking the blood of a cured vampire is the real and ultimate cure for this disease. Panicking, Bromley triggers the alarm, and right then, several army trucks pull up into the parking lot. When the soldiers reach the elevator and the doors open, they see Bromley standing there, but seeing him as a human, the bloodthirsty vampire soldiers lose their minds and brutally rip into their own boss. Meanwhile, Edward and Audrey head down the building, but the moment they step outside, a squad of soldiers blocks their path. Just then, Frankie makes a dramatic entry driving Lionel's car. Crushing the soldiers with his vehicle, he saves Edward's life. However, heavy army backup arrives instantly, surrounding them from all sides. Right then, Frankie decides to sacrifice himself and tells Edward to run away from there. In the blink of an eye, all the hungry vampire soldiers swarm Frankie, making him their prey. Edward had no time to mourn his brother's death. He immediately reaches the security room, where after a fierce struggle, he guns down two vampire guards and finishes off the third with Audrey's help. After this, as they look into the CCTV cameras, they are completely stunned. Every single soldier who had consumed Frankie's blood had now turned human, and the remaining vampire soldiers were now attacking these newly turned humans. A horrific bloodbath breaks out throughout the entire building. By the time Edward and Audrey make it back to the lobby, only a handful of soldiers who turned human were left alive. Just then, the villain Christopher storms in and guns down the remaining soldiers in cold blood. He screams out that there can be no cure for this disease. He was just about to kill Edward and Audrey too, when an arrow pierces straight through his chest. This arrow was shot by none other than Lionel, who had arrived there at the perfect moment. Audrey happily hugs Lionel, while Edward is left staring at his brother Frankie's lifeless body with tearful eyes. Following this, the three of them get into Lionel's car and drive away from there. Edward was now completely confident that they possessed the definitive cure for this disease, and they will soon turn the entire world human again. And with that ray of hope, this story ends right here. If you liked the video, please hit like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.